Look, I just couldn't do it. After playing two D&D games that likely have claims to stake as some of the worst to ever bear the license, I couldn't take any more misery. And I had originally planned to. This was supposed to be a video about Shadow Sorcerer, the last of the Silverbox titles, cause while that game is pretty much just as bad as its siblings, there are some interesting points to it that are worth talking about, and I expect that I'll get to it one day. But that day, for the sake of my sanity, will not be today. What I did not expect, however, is that I would wind up spending hours playing what you've already seen from the title. I installed it and fired it up on a whim, okay? And yeah, I proceeded to get hopelessly sucked in because that's exactly what these games are built to do. If you've never heard of it, Idle Champions of the Forgotten Realms is an incremental game, referred to more commonly as a clicker game, developed and released in 2018 by Codename Entertainment for mobile devices before eventually making its way to more proper systems in the 2 years following. It's basically Cookie Clicker with Dungeons & Dragons. Does anyone remember Cookie Clicker, or am I just dating myself at this point? What might be most interesting about Idle Champions is that, ironically, you don't actually do that much clicking. You can certainly click on the waves of enemies that miraculously appear from the right side of the screen until your hand feels about ready to fall off. But your clicking powers are pretty horrible, which means it's a good thing that you've got a whole assortment of characters from the Forgotten Realms to battle these enemies for you. It's like that meme, you know? Everyone is here. Brunor and Jarlaxle from the Drizzt series of novels, Minsk and Astarion from Baldur's Gate, and even Ashara. You know, from the Tomb of Horrors? A game which I totally gave a glowing review when discussing it in a previous video. For the love of God, I can't escape bad D&D games even when I'm actively trying to. Granted, the Forgotten Realms part of the name is something of an artifact title at this point, though the majority of the game does take place in the land of Faerun. Characters come from all over. Archon from the Critical Role universe of Exandria makes an appearance, as does the friggin' Dungeon Master from the 80s cartoon. I did not expect this, but I cannot describe the smile that was on my face when I saw this man appear on my screen. These characters are far more adept at dispatching enemies who drop their goddamn life savings whenever they're defeated. You then, in turn, use that gold to upgrade your champion so that they may grow stronger as to better stand against the gradually strengthening opposing forces. This is all par for the course in this type of incremental game. Of course, the entire premise of what makes a game like this fun is that it's basically like injecting dopamine straight into your veins. The numbers go up as you progress further, which means good and tells your brain that you should be happy, an effect which is only amplified as the numbers continue to stack multiplicatively. Look at these numbers shoot up. You telling me this isn't getting a rise out of you? The inherent folly of most clicker games is that this premise typically overstays its welcome after a few hours. The numbers can only keep you entranced for so long, and that was precisely what I had anticipated to be the case with Idle Champions. It was why I had never taken the time to check it out beforehand. No clicker game I had ever played managed to hold my attention for any significant stretch of time, and quite frankly, that led me to pretty much dismiss the entire genre as a waste of time. And yet, regardless of what my prior opinions may have predisposed me to, I slowly but surely found myself kinda liking Idle Champions. A lot of my enjoyment came from the fact that the game has some real depth to it beyond the obvious numbers go brr aspects. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to argue that Idle Champions is reinventing the genre. The premise on its face is very much the same as most any other game of its kind, so much so that I basically described the gameplay in its totality in the opener. Everything you do is still in service of the almighty goal of making the numbers go up, but it's everything going on outside of that which sets the game apart. In that way, whereas most other clicker games are decidedly binary, having only one track on which you are expected to ride, Idle Champions manages to introduce multiple, which helps to break up the monotony that can often be found in its gameplay format. For starters, characters are unique and varied, boasting their own stat lines, special abilities, and roles within the expected tank, damage, and support triangle of options. Most every champion is capable of fulfilling multiple roles, wherein you'll get the opportunity to push them into one direction or the other through bracket points in leveling. The upgrades that characters receive through leveling often play out through auras, forcing you to adjust positions as to garner the greatest benefit. Aspects such as character alignment and history may also unlock special bonuses and benefits, rewarding you for fielding a synergistic team of heroes to brave the depths with. Characters are also equipped with a selection of items which further increase their abilities. Equipment can be made more potent through the use of blacksmithing contracts, a consumable item acquired over the course of your adventures. Additionally, progressing champions to higher levels unlocks feats they can equip, which remain perpetually active even after they revert to level 1 at the beginning of a new quest. Further bonuses can be earned through whatever events or seasons might be running at a given time, meaning you'll want to keep an eye on what the flavor of the week is. For as many choices as you have, there are some restrictions on how your party can be constructed. Units occupy a specific place, or seat, as it's referred to in the game, on the scroll bar, and only one champion from a given seat can be used at a time. This means you've got to pick and choose who to use and when, though you can swap individual characters from a single seat whenever you want during a quest. This is pretty important, as certain champions typically will be better at different times as you go further along in a mission and enemies grow tougher. The missions that you'll be using these characters in are insular to themselves, starting you from square one with each new one begun, and are split into an assortment of chapters based on various locations across the realms. Each quest has distinctive objectives and parameters beyond simply playing them for a certain length of time. The actual shape of the formation frequently changes, sometimes you'll be forced to keep a certain character in the party, extra frequently supercharged enemies may spawn, or, chickens might take up the back 4 spots of your group. Seriously, we can deal with demons and beasts, but we can't handle a few chickens? Completing quests grants 2 primary rewards, gems and favor. Gems are used to purchase chests, which can possess champion equipment, upgrades, and items to aid in your endeavors. It can also be used to unlock certain cosmetics for characters, as well as these little dudes called familiars. Familiars can handle some of the more mundane tasks so you don't have to, such as using ultimate abilities, which are supremely powerful attacks that each character gains the ability to unlock, and even leveling. I, personally, usually just have them click on enemies, mainly because these animations are adorable to me. Look at them go! They're working so hard! Favor, in comparison, is segmented by each chapter and increases the gold found on subsequent quests undertaken in the same area. Beyond increasing gold find, however, favor can be spent for upgrades called blessings, which apply primarily to missions in that chapter, but they can also be spent for upgrades which apply across all chapters, something that is incredibly important. Obviously, spending favor on blessings reduces how much gold you'll find, so you have to determine what's more valuable, money or power. All of this comes together to ensure that there is some strategy at play. Over the course of any mission, you've got to understand who's best to level and when, where units are most effectively placed, and who should actually see the field. Outside of missions, you've got to spend your resources appropriately while remaining mindful of what items are at your disposal so that you don't handicap yourself on future quests in service of the one you're currently completing. It keeps things fresh and engaging, presenting you with different ways to unwrap the puzzle of figuring out which champions to use in relation to the task at hand. It is easy to get lost in all the systems in a good way, and uncovering new combinations and possibilities soon becomes far more entertaining than watching the numbers increase. These aspects might be small in the grand scheme of things, but the way they add some modicum of player input, mainly in the way that it forces you to use your brain, come together to place idle champions light years ahead of its contemporaries. And that leads to one of the most interesting issues that this game faces. And yes, I understand it's weird to claim that an issue is interesting, but just bear with me and I'll explain. While this game is certainly more engaging than most else on the market, it still falls victim to some of the pitfalls associated with the modern clicker game. For as much effort as the game puts into making it feel like your choices and decisions matter, it then undercuts damn near all of that with the way it's completely reliant on gacha elements. Almost everything in this game, from the content of chests, which items get upgraded through blacksmithing contracts, and hell, sometimes even the objectives and mechanics of missions themselves, is based on random chance. This is, of course, designed to keep you playing for longer and grinding until you're lucky enough to unlock whatever item, upgrade, or bonus you're looking for. Of course, you can bypass a fair measure of this randomness if you fork over some real-life cash in the in-game shop. Champions, uniquely powerful character feats, as well as troves of items to amplify your adventures with, are just some of what can be found, oftentimes for not insignificant figures. Just unlocking a character is $10, and heaps more if you want the bundles of chests and goodies needed to upgrade them to the point of playability. And I get it. This was a game originally released for mobile devices, so the fact that it's littered with microtransactions isn't really a surprise, and all free-to-play games have to keep themselves afloat one way or another. I sincerely have zero issue with the implementation of these systems, especially as they relate to the availability of cosmetics and other optional features. What I do have a problem with is how they make the game feel like it's at odds with itself. You're supposed to go through the effort of learning synergies, combinations, and generally putting in the time, even if much of it is idle, in order to yield the greatest dividends possible from the missions you complete. Then, instead of getting to cash those dividends as you would expect, you get sent to the casino to see if you won. It absolutely pulls the rug out from under the player, to craft a system that values their input and then rewards them with lottery tickets. Unfortunately, the game is shackled by this system. It needs the randomness and paid elements to bring in revenue so that it may survive, but what it needs to survive is actively hurting the better aspects of its gameplay. What's weird about all of this is that it's almost like the developers over at Codename are acutely aware of the toxic symbiotic relationship that the game has with its two systems. What I mean by that is that it's clearly obvious that they are doing everything they can to give those an opportunity to better their experience without spending any money. There's always some sort of sale running, there is nearly always an event which grants the latest characters for free upon their completion, as well as an entire mechanic based around letting the player spend in-game currency to go back and unlock any they may have missed previously. They hand out codes which are input into this pretty cool looking lock screen for chests like they're candy, with multiple new ones typically cropping up every day, and there's even in-game achievements which grant bonuses for free just for playing. The effort that they are putting in to make sure that the game can live up to its mechanics, being a clicker game that actually requires thought, is clear and very much appreciated. But there's nothing they can do about the necessary business elements other than trying to mitigate them as much as they reasonably can. It's just a shame that Idle Champions finds itself in such a precarious state, because for what it's worth, it is sincerely a pretty good game. For D&D nerds like myself, there is just something that makes you feel warm and fuzzy about getting to see all these characters in one place. Heck, it introduced me to some I hadn't even heard of before. The game has a lot of character, managing to mesh the casual nature of its gameplay with lighthearted fun. The conversations between characters during missions are entertaining, and while I wasn't a huge fan of them at first, the cartoonish graphics do start to grow on you. There's also some other goodies such as a jukebox of musical tracks centered around D&D, written and performed by people like Jason Charles Miller. I won't lie, they're pretty good, and honestly have better production than some of the stuff I've heard from bands on legitimate record label deals. Solely based on how it manages to spice up what might be the single most boring and simplistic gameplay format currently prevalent in the industry, I would say you should give Idle Champions a shot. Doubly so if you're already a fan of Dungeons & Dragons. Its good far outpaces the unfortunate ways in which it's still attached to some of the more annoying, seemingly eternal practices needed to make sure it's around for us to play in the first place. I had it open for almost the entirety of the time it took me to write this script. There's a lot to have fun with, and it feels like there's an effort put forward to let one have as much of that as possible.